just need to concentrate on this one because it's a nice sweepy one. Welcome to the Wayward Ornithopter YouTube channel. Found me on the ground this morning. Probably going to have a flight this afternoon, but it's such a beautiful day to take the bike out. I tend to ride all year round, but a really nice, warm, dry, sunny day to get the track bike out, open her up a little, and enjoy the bugs on the visor, and to muse on some of the thoughts that have occurred to me since I started flying the Parrot Bebop and Bebop 2 drones, and in response to some of the questions that keep cropping up in the comment section of the YouTube channel. And I guess I'm marshalling these thoughts under the heading of things I wish I'd known when I started out drone flying. They're just my own personal observations, references to some good questions I've had. And if you find any of them useful, then I'm happy. So to start with, I'd strongly recommend before you buy a drone, decide whether to get a drone, or if you've got one, before you do some serious flying, do familiarise yourself with the regulations and legislations that relate to drone flying where you are. So I'm in the UK, and the UK Civil Aviation Authority produces some very nice clear guidelines about height, line of sight, distance. So height, maximum 400 feet, similar in many countries, but make sure you know what it is where you are. 400 feet is about 110, 112 metres, I guess. Line of sight. In the UK, you have to keep your drone in line of sight. Doesn't mean to say you can still see it when it's a kilometre away and just a speck that you can only see through a telescope. But it must be unbroken line of sight, so not the other side of a tower block or halfway across the city where buildings are obscuring your view. And then distance. So that's about keeping 50 metres away from people and buildings that you're not in control of, and 150 metres away from places where your drone could be a real safety issue. That's crowds, football stadia, geese. I lied about the geese. And busy main arterial roads. And it does give me the willies when I see people flying the drone over a 6-lane freeway. And that's where you get the other side of regulation comes using a bit of noggin, a bit of common sense. Think about what's directly ahead of or underneath your drone. And would you really want it to land there? So obviously there's the risk to losing your drone, so the first time you fly out over water is a bit hairy. Because you know that if it drops down in the middle of the lake, you've lost your drone for good. And there's about 500 to 1,000 pounds going down the swing. But the safety issue is an even bigger consideration. And the idea of a drone flying low over a freeway where people are supposed to be concentrating on driving the 3-ton automobiles at 70 miles an hour, or God forbid a drone crashing onto a busy freeway, doesn't bear thinking about. You're talking loss of life. So always think about where you're flying your drone relative to your safety and the safety of others, as well as the recovery of your drone. Which leads on to the second point, which is about altitude. And for the Parrot Bebop and the Bebop 2, it always measures altitude relative to your takeoff point. So regardless of how high your drone is above the ground or water level, the altitude that it displays is always relative to where it took off from. So if you fly from the top of the mountain in a flat line 10 meters above the top of the mountain, within a few meters the ground's probably 50, 100, even more meters below you, but it will still be showing that you're 10 meters because that's how high you are above your takeoff point. More scarily, if you take off on flat land surrounded by trees or hills, remember that just because your drone is 50 meters above where you took off from, it's not necessarily 50 meters above the terrain or the trees that may be on ground that's higher than you are. And that's particularly pertinent to when you're flying a drone and risk losing signal and invoking return to home. Because on hitting return to home, or when the drone invokes return to home because it's lost Wi-Fi signal for a given period of time, whatever altitude it's at when you hit return to home, or when it loses signal and decides to come back, it'll maintain that altitude. But if there's anything between the drone and you above its current altitude, you're going to hit it, and there's a good chance you're going to lose your drone. And I did put a video on YouTube, I'll put a link in the description, that kind of helps you to think through altitude and the risks of hitting obstacles, particularly in the context of return to home. The next point's about GPS. First point about GPS is on the Parrot Bebop you get a green light when your drone has found a solid GPS signal. On the Bebop 2 you get that, but you also get a display of the number of satellites. Don't fly when you don't have a strong GPS signal. There's a good chance you'll lose your drone, and if it hasn't recorded its position on GPS from the takeoff, return home is about as much use as an ashtray on this motorcycle. It will return to wherever it thought was its last safe point, which could be anywhere. The other issue about GPS is to recognise that it's not guaranteed to be fully accurate. Now, my experience flying, and where I fly I tend to get between 14 and 17 satellites, the accuracy is really good, and usually within a metre, and with a few tests with a solid GPS signal. On a number of occasions it's auto landed within a foot of where it took off from. But do recognise that that's not guaranteed. So if you're doing a point of interest flight around the top of that tree, for example, and you decide to stay 2 metres away from it, I work on the basis of plus or minus 5 metres. So if you are 3 metres out with your GPS, you may well hit unlucky and hit the tree. So always allow for a bit of leeway. I'd recommend at least 5 metres leeway on your GPS accuracy. And my final observation is about software and firmware. It's clear from comments 1 or 2 people are flying their drones where they either haven't updated the Free Flight 3 app for the Bebop, or they haven't updated the firmware on either their drone, or if they have a Sky controller, on the Sky controller. So before you set out, when you're charging your batteries, making sure that your tablet or smartphone's fully charged and all your drone batteries are fully charged, take the time to check for updates on the drone, on your Sky controller if you have one, and on the Free Flight 3 app. And the only other observation is about the graphic overlays with flight dynamics, which a number of us use, and I'll put a link in the description. But a very helpful chap has produced free software that allows you to create custom overlays showing the speed, altitude, pitch and roll, distance, duration, GPS track of your drone, and overlay it onto the video footage from your Bebop. And if you're not sure how to use it, I'll also put a link to a very good video that's been put together by a YouTuber called Helder Hugo, a Portuguese chap who does some pretty impressive things with his Bebop, and has just published a really good walkthrough of how to create the overlays, and I recommend you do that. Final observation, I'm mostly a Mac user, but a couple of my Macs will boot camp into Windows 10. I've not managed to find a way of running overlays using Mac OS, so if you're on a Mac, you probably need to be able to boot across into Windows